My memories are very confused. There's even much doubt as to where they begin, for at times I feel appalling vistas of years stretching behind me, while at other times it seems as if the present moment were an isolated point in a gray, formless infinity. While I know I am speaking, I have a vague impression that some strange or perhaps terrible mediation will be needed to bear what I have to say to the points where I wish to be heard. My identity too is bewilderingly cloudy. I seem to have suffered a great shock, perhaps from some utterly monstrous outgrowth of my cycles of unique, incredible experience. These cycles of experience, of course, all stem from that worm-riddled book. I remember when I found it in a dimly lighted place near the black, oily river where the mists always swirl. That place was very old, and the ceiling-high shelves full of rotting volumes reached back endlessly through the windowless inner rooms and alcoves. There were, besides, great formless heaps of books on the floor and in crude bins. And it was in one of those heaps that I found the thing. I never learned its title, for the early pages were missing, but it fell open towards the end and gave me a glimpse of something which sent my senses reeling. There was a formula, a sort of list of things to say and do, which I had recognized as something black and forbidden, something which I had recalled before and feared of paragraphs of mixed abhorrence and fascination penned by those strange ancient delvers into the universe's guarded secrets, whose decaying texts I loved to absorb. It was a key, a guide to a certain gateway and transitions of which mystics have dreamed and whispered since the race was young, and which led to freedoms and discoveries beyond the 3 dimensions and realms of life and matter that we know. Not for the centuries had any man recalled its vital substance or known where to find it, but this book was very old indeed. No printing press, but the hand of some half-crazed monk had traced these ominous Latin phrases in unicles of awesome antiquity. I remember how the old man leered and tittered, and made a curious sign with his hand when I bore it away. He had refused to take pay for it, and only long afterward did I guess why. As I hurried home through those narrow, winding, mist-choked waterfront streets, I had frightful impressions of being stealthily followed by softly padding feet. Tottering houses on both sides seemed alive with a fresh and morbid malignity, as if some hitherto closed channel of evil understanding had been abruptly opened. I felt that those walls and overhanging gables of milled wet brick and fungus plaster and timber, with fishy eye-like diamond-paned windows that leered, could hardly desist from advancing and crushing me. Yet I had read only the least fragment of that blasphemous rune before closing the book and bringing it away. I remember how I read the book at last, white-faced and locked in the attic room that I had long devoted to strange searchings. The great house was very still, for I had not gone up till after midnight. I think I had a family then, though the details are very uncertain, but I know there were many servants. Just what the year was, I cannot say, for since I have known many ages and dimensions, and have had all my notions of time dissolved and refashioned. It was by the light of candles that I read, and I recall the relentless dripping of wax, and there were chimes that came every now and from the distant belfries. I seemed to keep track of those chimes with a peculiar intentness, as if I feared to hear some very remote, intruding note among them. Then came the first scathing and fumbling at the dormer window that looked high above the other roofs of the city. It came as I droned aloud the 9th verse of the primal lay, and I knew amidst my shudders what it meant. For he who passes the gateways also wins a shadow, and never again can he be alone. I had evoked, and the book was indeed all I had suspected. That night I passed the gateway to the vortex of twisted time and vision, and when the morning found me in the attic room, I saw in the walls and the shelves and the fittings that which I had never seen before. Nor could I ever after see the world as I had known it. Mixed with the present scene was always a little of the past and a little of the future, and every once familiar object loomed alien in the new perspective brought by the widened sight. From then on, I walked in a fantastic dream of unknown and half-known shapes, and with each new gateway crossed, the less plainly could I recognize the things of the narrow sphere to which I had so long been bound. What I saw about me, none else saw, and I grew doubly silent and aloof, lest I be thought mad. Dogs had a fear of me, for they felt the outside shadow which never left my side. But still I read more, and hidden, forgotten books and scrolls to which my new vision led me, and pushed through fresh gateways of space and being and life patterns towards the core of the unknown cosmos. I remember the night I made the 5 concentric circles of fire on the floor, and stood in the innermost one chanting that monstrous litany the messenger from Tartary had brought. The walls melted away, and I was swept back by a black wind through gulfs of fathomless gray where needle-like pinnacles of unknown mountains miles below me. After a while, there was utter blackness, and then the light of myriad stars forming strange, alien constellations. Finally, I saw a green-lit plain far below me, and discerned on it twisted towers of a city built in no fashion I had ever known or read or dreamed of. As I floated closer to the city, I saw a great square building of stone in an open space, and felt a hideous fear clutching me. I screamed and struggled, and after a blankness was again in my attic room, sprawled flat over the 5 phosphorescent circles on the floor. In that night's wandering, there were no more strangers than in any former night's wandering, but there was more of a terror because I knew I was closer to those outside gulfs and worlds than I had been before. Therefore, I was more cautious with my incantations, for I had no wish to be cut off from my body and from the earth and unknown abysses whence I could never return. In the Valley of Nis, the accursed waning moon shines thinly, tearing a path for its light with feeble horns through the lethal foliage of a great upas tree. And within the depths of the valley, where the light reaches not, move forms not meet to be beheld. Rank is but the herbage on each slope, where evil vines and creeping plants crawl amidst the stones of ruined palaces, twining tightly about broken columns and strange monoliths, and heaving up marble pavements laid by forgotten hands. And in trees that grow gigantic in crumbling courtyards leap little apes, while in and out of deep treasure vaults writhe poisonous serpents and scaly things without a name. Vast are the stones which sleep beneath coverlets of dank moss, and mighty were the walls from which they fell. For all time did their builders erect them, and soothe they yet serve nobly, for beneath them the grey toad makes his habitation. And yet at the very bottom of the valley lies the river Thon, whose waters are slimy and filled with weeds. Yet from its hidden springs it rises, and to its subterranean grottos it flows, so that the daemon of the valley knows not why its waters are red, nor whither they are bound. And the genie that haunts the moonbeams spake to the daemon of the valley, saying, I am old, and forget much. Tell me the deeds and aspect and name of those who built these things of stone. And the daemon replied, I am memory, and am wise in the lore of the past. But I too am old. These beings were like the waters of the river Thon, not to be understood. Their deeds I recall not, for they were but of the moment. Their aspects I recall dimly, for it was like to that of the little apes in the trees. Their name I recall clearly, for it rhymed with that of the river. These beings of yesterday were called man. Satisfied with the answer of the daemon, the genie flew back to his thin-horned moon. Yet the daemon chose to remain as to watch the final fleeting moments of mankind, a small ape clinging to a tree in a crumbling courtyard. It was but the design of Angelo Ricci and Joe Kaznick and Manuel Silva to call on the terrible old man. This old man dwells all alone in a very ancient house on Water Street near the sea, and is reputed to be both exceedingly rich and exceedingly feeble, which forms a situation very attractive to men of the profession of Messrs. Ricci, Kaznick, and Silva, for that profession was nothing less than dignified robbery. The inhabitants of Kingsport say and think many things about the terrible old man, which generally keeps him safe from the attention of gentlemen like Mr. Ricci and his colleagues, despite the almost certain fact that he hides his fortune of indefinite magnitude somewhere about his musky and venerable abode. He is, in truth, a very strange person, believed to have been a captain of an East India clipper ship in his day, so old that no one can remember when he was young, and so taciturn that few know his real name. And among the gnarled trees in the front yard of his aged and neglected place, he maintains a strange collection of large stones, oddly grouped and painted so that they resemble the idols in some obscure Eastern temple. This collection frightens away almost all the small boys who love to taunt the terrible old man about his long white hair and beard, or to break the small paned windows of his dwelling with wicked missiles. But there are other things which frighten the older and more curious folk who sometimes steal up to the house to peer through those dusty panes. These folks say that on a table in a bare room on the ground floor are many peculiar bottles, and each a small piece of lead suspended in a pendulum wise from a string. And they say that the terrible old man talks to these bottles, addressing them by such names as Jack, Scarface, Long Tom, Spanish Joe, Peters, and May Ellis, and that whenever he speaks to a bottle, the little lead pendulum within makes certain definite vibrations, as if in answer. Those who have watched the tall, lean, terrible old man in these peculiar conversations do not watch him again. But Angelo Ricci and Joe Kaznick and Manuel Silva were not of the Kingsport blood. They were of the new and heterogeneous alien stock which lies outside the charmed circle of New England life and traditions, and they saw in the terrible old man merely a tottering, almost helpless graybeard who could not walk without the aid of his knotted cane and whose thin, weak hand shook pitifully. They were really quite sorry in their way for the lonely, unpopular old fellow, whom everybody shunned and at whom all dogs barked singularly. But business is business, and to a robber whose soul is in his profession, there is a lure and a challenge about a very old and very feeble man who has no account at the bank and who pays for his few necessities at the village store with Spanish gold and silver minted 2 centuries ago. As prearranged, Messrs. Ricci, Kasnick, and Silva selected the night of April 11th for their call. Mr. Ricci and Mr. Silva were to interview the poor old gentleman, while Mr. Kasnick waited for them and the presumable metallic burden with a covered motor car in Ship Street by the gate in the tall rear wall of their host's grounds. Desire to avoid needless explanations in case of unexpected police intrusions prompted these plans for a quiet and ostentatious departure. The 3 adventurers start out separately in order to prevent any evil-minded suspicions afterwards. Messrs. Ricci and Silva met in Water Street by the old man's front gate, and although they did not like the way the moon shone down upon the painted stones through the budding branches of the gnarled trees, they had more important things to think about than mere idle superstition. They feared it might be unpleasant work making the terrible old man loquacious concerning his hoarded silver and gold, for aged sea captains are notably stubborn and perverse. Still, he was very old and very feeble, and there were 2 visitors. Messrs. Ricci and Silva were experienced in the art of making unwilling persons voluble, and the screams of a weak and exceptionally venerable man can be easily muffled. So they moved up to the one lighted window and heard the terrible old man talking childishly to his bottles with pendulums. There they donned their masks and knocked politely at the weather-stained oaken door. Waiting seemed very long to Mr. Kasnick as he fidgeted restlessly in his covered motor car by the terrible old man's back gate in Ship Street. He was more than ordinarily tender-hearted, and he did not like the hideous screams he had heard in the ancient house just after the hour appointed for the deed. Had he not told his colleagues to be as gentle as possible with the pathetic old sea captain? Very nervously he watched that narrow oaken gate and the high and ivy-clad stone wall, and frequently he consulted his watch and wondered at the delay. Had the old man died before revealing where his treasure was hidden, and had a thorough search become necessary? Mr. Kasnick did not like to wait so long in the dark in such a place. Then he sensed a soft tread or tapping on the wall inside the gate, heard a gentle fumbling at a rusty latch, and saw the narrow, heavy door swing inward. And in the pallid glow of the single dim street lamp, he strained his eyes to see what his colleagues had brought out of the sinister house which loomed so close behind. But when he looked, he did not see what he had expected, for his colleagues were not there at all, but only the terrible old man leaning quietly on his knotted cane and smiling hideously. Mr. Kasnick had never before noticed the color of the man's eyes. Now he saw that they were yellow. Little things make considerable excitement in little towns, which is the reason that the Kingsport people talked all that spring and summer about the 3 unidentifiable bodies, horribly slashed as with many cutlasses and horribly mangled as by the tread of many cruel boot heels which the tide washed in. And some people even spoke of things as trivial as the deserted motor car found in Ship Street, or certain especially inhuman cries, probably of a stray animal or migratory bird, heard in the night by wakeful citizens. But in this village, gossip of the terrible old man took no interest at all. He was by nature reserved, and when one is aged and feeble, one's reserve is doubly strong. Besides, so ancient a sea captain must have witnessed scores of things much more stirring in the far-off days of his unremembered youth. I was shewn into the attic chamber by a grave, intelligent-looking man with quiet clothes and an iron-gray beard who spoke to me in this fashion. Yes, he lived here, but I don't advise your doing anything. Your curiosity makes you irresponsible. We never come here at night. It's only because of his will that we keep it this way. You know what he did. The abominable society took charge at last, and we don't know where he is buried. There was no way the law or anything else could reach the society. I hope you won't stay till after dark, and I beg of you to let that thing on the table, the thing that looks like a matchbox, alone. We don't know what it is, but we suspect it has something to do with what he did. We even avoid looking at it very steadily. After a time, the man left me alone in the attic room. It was very dingy and dusty, and only primitively furnished, but it had a neatness which shewed it was not a slum denizen's quarters. There were shelves full of theological and classical books, and another bookcase containing treatises on magic, Paracelsus, Albertus Magnus, Trithimus, Hermes, Borelius, and others in strange alphabets whose titles I could not decipher. The furniture was plain. There was a door, but it only led into a closet. The only egress was the aperture in the floor up to which the crude, steep staircase led. The windows were of bull's-eyes patterns, and the black oak beams bespoke unbelievable antiquity. Plainly, this house was of the old world. I seemed to know where I was, but could not recall what I knew. Certainly the town was not London. My impression is of a small seaport. The small object on the table fascinated me intensely. I seemed to know what to do with it, for I drew a pocket electric light, or what looked like one, out of my pocket and nervously tested its flashes. The light was not white, but violet. It seemed less like true light than like some radioactive bombardment. I recall that I did not regard it as a common flashlight. Indeed, I had a common flashlight in another pocket. It was getting dark, and the ancient roofs and chimney pots outside looked very queer through the bull-eye window panes. Finally, I summoned up courage and propped the small object up on the table against the book, then turned the rays of the peculiar violet light upon it. The light seemed now to be more like a rain or hail of small violet particles than like a continuous beam. As the particles struck the glassy surface at the center of the strange device, they seemed to produce a crackling noise like the sputtering of a vacuum tube through which sparks are passed. The dark glassy surface displayed a pinkish glow, and a vague white shape seemed to be taking a form at its center. Then I noticed that I was not alone in the room, and put the ray projector back in my pocket. But the newcomer did not speak, nor did I hear any sound whatever during all the immediately following moments. Everything was a shadowy pantomime, as if seen at a vast distance through some intervening haze, although on the other hand the newcomer and all subsequent comers loomed large and close, as if both near and distant, according to some abnormal geometry. The newcomer was a thin, dark man of medium height, attired in the clerical garb of the Anglican Church. He was apparently about 30 years old, with a sallow olive complexion and fairly good features, but an abnormally high forehead. His black hair was well cut and neatly brushed, and he was clean-shaven though blue-chinned with a heavy growth of beard. He wore rimless spectacles with steel bows. His build and lower facial features were like other clergymen I had seen, but he had a vastly higher forehead, and was darker, more intelligent-looking, and also more subtly and conceitedly evil-looking. At the present moment, having just lighted a faint oil lamp, he looked nervous, and before I knew it, he was casting all his magical books into a fireplace on the window side of the room, where the wall slanted sharply, which I had not noticed before. The flames devoured the volumes greedily, leaping up in strange colors and emitting indescribably hideous odors as the strangely hieroglyphed leaves and wormy bindings succumbed to the devastating element. All at once I saw there were others in the room, grave-looking men in clerical costume, one of whom wore the bands and knee breeches of a bishop. Though I could hear nothing, I could see that they were bringing a decision of vast import to the first comer. They seemed to hate and fear him at the same time, and he seemed to return these sentiments. His face set itself into a grim expression, but I could see his right hand shaking as he tried to grip the back of a chair. The bishop pointed to the empty case and to the fireplace, where the flames had died down amidst a charged, non-committal mass, and seemed filled with a peculiar loathing. The first comer then gave a wry smile, then reached out with his left hand towards the small object on the table. Everyone then seemed frightened. The procession of clerics began filing down the steps stairs through the trap door in the floor, turning and making menacing gestures as they left. The bishop was the last to go. The first comer now went to a cupboard on the inner side of the room and extracted a coil of rope. Mounting a chair, he attached one end of the rope to a hook in the great exposed central beam of black oak and began making a noose with the other end. Realizing he was about to hang himself, I started forward to dissuade or save him. He saw me and ceased his preparations, looking at me with a kind of triumph which puzzled and disturbed me. He slowly stepped down from the chair and began gliding towards me with a positively wolfish grin on his dark, thin-lipped face. I felt somehow in deadly peril, and drew out the peculiar ray projector as a weapon of defense. Why I thought it could help me, I do not know. I turned it on, full in his face, and saw the sallow features glow first with violet and then with pinkish light. His expression of wolfish exultation began to be crowded aside by a look of profound fear, which did not, however, wholly displace the exultation. He stopped in his tracks, then, flailing his arms wildly in the air, began to stagger backwards. I saw he was edging towards the open stairwell on the floor, and tried to shout out a warning, but he did not hear me. In another instant, he lurched backward through the opening and was lost to the view. I found difficulty moving towards the stairwell, but when I did get there I found no crushed body on the floor below. Instead, there was a clatter of people coming up with lanterns, for the spell of the phantasmal silence had broken, and I had once more heard sounds and saw figures as normally tri-dimensional. Something had evidently drawn a crowd to this place. Had there been a noise I had not heard? Presently the two people, simply villagers apparently, farthest in the lead saw me, and stood paralyzed. One of them shrieked loudly and reverberantly. "Ah, it be easier. Again?" Then they all turned and fled frantically, all that is but one. When the crowd was gone, I saw the grave bearded man who had brought me to this place, standing alone with a lantern. He was gazing at me gaspingly and fascinatedly, but did not seem afraid. Then he began to ascend the stairs and joined me in the attic. He spoke. "So you didn't let it alone. I'm sorry. I know what has happened. It happened once before, but the man got frightened and shot himself. You ought not to have made him come back. You know what he wants, but you mustn't get frightened like the other man he got. Something very strange and terrible has happened to you, but it didn't get far enough to hurt your mind and personality. If you keep cool and accept the need for making certain radical readjustments in your life, you can keep right on enjoying the world and the fruits of your scholarship. But you can't live here, and I don't think you want to go back to London. I advise America. You mustn't try anything more with that thing. Nothing can be put back now. It would only make matters worse to do so or summon anything. You are not as badly off as you might be, but you must get out of here and stay away. You better thank heaven it didn't go further. I'm going to prepare you as bluntly as I can. There's been a certain change in your personal appearance. He always causes that. But in a new country you can get used to it. There's a mirror up on the other end of the room, and I'm going to take you to it. You'll get a shock, though you'll see nothing repulsive." I was now shaking with a deadly fear, and the bearded man almost had to hold me up as he walked me across the room to the mirror. The faint lamp, i.e. that formerly on the table, not the still fainter lamp he had brought, in his free hand. And what I saw was a thin, dark man of medium stature, attired in the clerical garb of the Anglican Church, apparently about 30 and with rimless steel-bowed glasses glistening beneath a sallow, olive forehead of abnormal height. It was but the silent first-comer who had burned his books, and for the rest of my life, in outward form, I was to be that man.